Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Hell Bunny Podcast. This episode is sponsored by the Coca-Cola Corporation. Finally, a big ticket sponsor, now with 98% less cocaine than the original formulation. I'm joined as always with Aaron Redwing, my co-host. I am also a co-host. I'm not the host.
I can't make that joke every time.
It's very progressive.
Getting a little tired.
Whatever. Anyways, and today, very special guest, Adam Krellenstein. Krellenstein,
you got it. You first try.
Excellent.
Good job. Yeah.
Incredible work.
Yeah,
I told you he has a natural knack for this.
That's right.
You know?
The creator, co-creator, lead dev. What's
both exactly?
Yeah.
Host, co-host, creator,
Exactly.
co-creator.
You have this
exactly.
problem too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What? So how would you describe your role?
Of Counterparty.
Yeah, in
Sorry,
Counterparty.
we did invent that.
Yeah, I guess. So yeah, it was it was a team of maybe three people. Myself, Evan Wagner, and Robbie Dermody that created Counterparty, the project.
What year? What year?
I started coding at the end of 2013, maybe like October, November 2013.
Coding on Counterparty?
On Counterparty, yeah, exactly. And launched in January of 2014. And my role was really like I designed the protocol, I implemented it. I built the reference implementation, all the back end stuff. And Evan and Robbie worked on other things. Robbie worked on the wallet called Counter Wallet, which was a sort of a client-side cryptography wallet. I think maybe the first one in the space.
What do you mean a client? What do you mean a client?
It did all the key management in JavaScript. So you actually, there were no it wasn't server hosted keys, which at the time I think was unusual. Yeah. And so together it was a collaborative project, but I focused on the protocol very much.
And then, let's go back a little bit. How did the idea of Counterparty happen? I was reading on the Wikipedia page that it was part of a plan by Overstock to issue shares.
That happened later. That was 2015.
Okay,
yeah.
Then I guess
we can
go
roll
back.
Yeah, exactly.
So because we started with 3 people programming on it, and who had the idea? What was the genesis of?
Yeah. So first of all, these were the days of Bitcoin Talk, the Bitcoin forum, when everything happened there, right? And the Bitcoin Core devs were there. Vitalik was on there. People were talking about Bitcoin 2.0 was sort of the buzzword at the time. People were trying to figure out how to use.
And this is 2014?
2013.
2013.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
People were trying to figure out how to use blockchains for more than just payments. The I guess inciting factor was exchanges were failing, going down. People were losing funds, so they said, "Let's build a decentralized exchange." So they don't lose their money when the exchange goes down. And people were figuring out how to do smart contracts. I remember Vitalik Buterin posted on Bitcoin Talk saying, "Oh, here's how you would do a contract for difference as a really simple futures contract, a derivative contract in a smart contract."
And a contract for difference is essentially 2 people taking different sides of a bet on the price performance of 2 different assets.
Of one, it could be a pair, any value really.
Right, but it's like a Bitcoin in dollars or something.
Yes, as
an
example, yes. And so you could just bet, and then the greater the difference, if the ratio in that case goes up or down, you make more or less money in proportion to how far away you get from some midpoint. And that's a really good way to bet on something, right? And to have a derivative off of other assets. And so people were trying to figure out what that looked like. And the most concrete idea, inspiration, was a project called Mastercoin.
Right.
Which really did one of the first ICOs. They weren't called ICOs back then, but they raised a few $100,000 in a coin sale. And they sort of minted Mastercoin and they sold it. And then they spent a number of months talking about building Mastercoin, and they never really did anything.
That sounds like an ICO.
Yes, exactly. It really set the precedent. It just really, yes, it was the pattern was established very early on. And because it was so early, I tried to get involved. Robbie was this person that was on the internet that also was interested in getting involved, and we were just chatting with the project, the people involved in the project, trying to figure out what they were doing. And I bought some of this ICO, and I was like, "Hey guys, build something. This is a cool idea." The idea of Mastercoin was to build a meta protocol, what we now call a meta protocol, which is embedding data inside Bitcoin transactions and then parsing it out deterministically so that you have some additional functionality.
Mhm.
The creator of this idea was a guy named J.R. Willett, who wrote a white paper called the Second Bitcoin White Paper. And he would post on Bitcoin Talk about how he was going to be the world's first trillionaire.
And is this the guy who later did like a series of projects? Like
He
EOS
himself-
and Steemit, or was that somebody else?
It was someone else involved in the project, whose name is escaping me right now. But there were some people involved in early Mastercoin days that went on to do other projects.
Yeah, that then they
related,
did for a little bit and got bored of, and then
Exactly.
I remember one guy in particular. I think he did like maybe Mastercoin and then Steemit, which was like the social media platform, and then EOS.
Yes, exactly.
And he just had this history of like raising like $1 billion in like some crowd sale.
and then doing it again.
And then doing something.
Hell yeah.
And then and he kind
Exactly.
of Hubermaned it. You know what I mean? He kind of like every time he would do something and it would fail, he just wouldn't talk about it. And then he'd be like, I'm doing this thing. And it's like, well, what about the last thing? He's like, yeah.
It's kind of genius.
It's
Dudes
a good
rock.
strat. Yeah, dudes rock.
Exactly. That was the thing. Yeah.
So you were talking to like internet people.
Internet people. Exactly. I was just, interested in Bitcoin.
Having fun on the computer.
I'd bought a small amount of Bitcoin at the time. The price was, going up. People were starting to talk about it in a new way. And it was very much the Wild West. Like everyone was a total amateur. And Mastercoin had this really good idea. J.R. Willett. And then the project was vaporware. And I owned a little bit of it.
Wait, I thought that Mastercoin turned into something.
Omni. It turned into Omni.
But it was vaporware? Like I thought Mastercoin wasn't vaporware.
It eventually became more real, I think because of the pressure from Counterparty. So what happened is Mastercoin launched, they built like the simplest possible wallet where you could encode a send transaction, broadcast it, and move your Mastercoin that you had bought from the crowd sale. And that was it. It was just sends. And that existed, I think, in late 2013, but there were like a couple of incompatible implementations of that, if I remember, in Ruby. And at some point, looking at this project and being frustrated, trying to help out, I said, screw it, I'm going to do it myself. And I sat down and spent a couple of months building Counterparty. And it had not just sends, it had, a fair amount of functionality that people had sort of been asking for, talking about existing. I think on day one, and we launched in January
of 2014.
2014, yeah. And we didn't have an ICO. There's a whole story there, but we built a lot of functionality immediately out of the box, and then we had a wallet and that sort of thing, the web wallet. And the functionality was create new tokens with like descriptions and sort of metadata associated with them, contracts for difference. We had a working trustless decentralized exchange on day one, which people didn't sort of expect. And it wasn't a decentralized exchange the way people talk about it now, where it's sort of, often PSBT based, or sort of, you'll have an AMM or that kind of thing. It was a actual like in smart contract limit order book. And that's, you can just sort of implement it if you're just, writing, Python as I was. And we launched with like a Bitcoin Talk post. And it got a fair amount of interest. The way that we launched was using a method called proof of burn now, which had been sort of talked about. People had sort of theorized the idea of destroying one cryptocurrency in a way that was provable, and then creating the new currency as part of that process, right? Implementing in the protocol, you can detect when the coin is destroyed.
Right.
And we thought that was a phenomenal idea, and we wanted to implement it. I pushed pretty hard for that. We didn't want to do an ICO. We didn't want to.
Why didn't you want to do an ICO?
A couple of reasons. One was the simple fact that it was unclear if it was extremely illegal. I'm an American citizen. I didn't want to go to jail forever for an illegal securities offering. Secondly, it felt a little scammy. Even back then, it was, you're taking money from investors who, and like there isn't a contract, right? There's just we promise that we'll build the thing. Yeah. And, we hope that
we'll try our best.
Yeah, we'll try our best, right? And
the devs will do something.
It was immediately obvious that it was potentially going to, go bad. And we also just wanted to do something very much, this is sort of sappy and naive. We wanted to do something according to Satoshi's vision. It was very much we wanted to be Bitcoin adjacent, Bitcoin inspired. And the analogy is the way that with Bitcoin, you destroy energy to turn it into Bitcoin. once you're in the digital land, then you get to destroy Bitcoin and turn it into something new.
Mm-hmm.
And it works great. So what we did was we said, there's a month-long period, January 2014, where you can destroy Bitcoin. And when you destroy it with with the Counterparty software, it will create XCP, which was the native currency of Counterparty, which is used in the smart contract functionality. And with I guess it was like a linearly decreasing ratio or something like that to incentivize people to do it in the beginning, earlier in the month. And the way that you would destroy this Bitcoin was sort of ugly, but kind of nice, which is just sending it to an unspendable address. And it was an address that we sort of constructed such that there was going to be no private key for it. It just, was too human readable in a way. One Counterparty XXXXX, more or less. And people destroyed 2,000 Bitcoin, which at the time, which is
RIP.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's still there. And I mean, at the time it was worth $2 million. And of course now it's worth a little bit more than that. If it were recoverable.
If anyone can do the math at home.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Grind for the private
Just
key.
grind for private zeros,
If you're going to grind for a private key, for a private key, that's a pretty good one to start with. I mean, at the time it was a substantial, sort of amount of money associated with not a crowdfund, of course, but something adjacent to a crowdfund. And I think, it's definitely up there in the list of, I guess, all-time historical intentional destructions of value, which I'm pretty happy about.
How did you come up with the name? 'Cause
Counterparty?
It's perfect. It's so good.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, some people don't like it. I've definitely, heard some resistance there. The idea was that the network would be your counterparty. You were the party, and the network was the counterparty. You weren't going to trade with any particular person. You were going to trade with the network, with that limit order, fully decentralized limit order book. And that was an interesting thing, this sort of this network as a participant in your financial transactions.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I think it also worked because I associate Counterparty with this very specific kind of psychedelic Pepe aesthetic, and I think having party in the name sort of helped. You know what I mean? It's I don't know. It just
I
works
love that.
on a lot of levels.
I didn't expect that. Yeah, I mean, we're the party people, in case, right? And we would, there are many parties that have been hosted that are called the Counterparty, including one in Miami, I guess, last year.
And what was the purpose of the native currency of XCP within, what's the function within Counterparty?
Yeah, I mean, the basic idea was to use it for the stuff that you couldn't use Bitcoin for, the functionality of the network. So, for instance, if you wanted to escrow funds in a smart contract, you couldn't do that with Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah, and this is something that I think people really get wrong a lot, and actually that people miss about other proposals to do things on Bitcoin. Like, for example, not to pick on any one in particular, but they're well known.
You could pick on one in particular.
Yeah, I'm not really picking on them. But so, for example, with RGB and Taproot assets, for RGB, both of them, Taproot assets does have some smart contract functionality, but I know that RGB has extensive smart contract functionality. And if there's Bitcoin in an output that's simultaneously also encumbered with the RGB smart contract, it's always possible for the owner of the output to just move the Bitcoin in violation of the smart contract. So every smart contract that you have on RGB that attempts to encumber Bitcoin in some way has this additional clause, which is or just destroy the state of the smart contract and move the Bitcoin, right? You need an asset that can be encumbered by smart contracts, and if it's a meta protocol, that asset can't be Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's some ways of working around it. So, for instance, we had this decentralized exchange where you could trade a token that you issued against any other token, and there was sort of a native XCP became the native unit of account of that, right? It was the natural, pair that you were trading, the currency that you're trading against. We also added support for trading against Bitcoin. But the way you do that is with a lockup, with a commit reveal sort of, thing, right?
I see, yeah.
You'd sort of commit to paying, and then someone have to send the Bitcoin in order to finalize the transaction. And because we were worried about rollback or, reorganizations, that was a 10 block or 6 block window that people had to wait. That's too long. And people never really traded counterparty assets against Bitcoin because of that extra layer. So you sort of can do it in some cases, but it makes it very painful, more expensive, more fraud. People lose money. And there are a lot of cases where you just want an asset that you can escrow trustlessly. And we had other functionality too, like we had oracles and really the first prediction market, using contracts for difference and that kind of thing, like binary contracts for difference. And we used XCP for all of that. We all used it for fees, right? So the fees would be proportional, not to the size of the Bitcoin transaction, but to some arbitrary function that we established. And it was all very primitive, but XCP was used for all of those things. We also recognized, I think, pretty early on that cryptocurrencies can be useful for just sustaining an ecosystem. That ended up not really working for Counterparty super well. The XCP, for a couple of reasons, which I'm happy to go into, like XCP it's been hard to acquire. The fees were off, like I hard coded values for the fees that ended up not sort of working 10 years later. And so it hasn't always played the appropriate role. It wasn't like very well integrated into the smart contract system. It was just a little, hacky. But it also was an important part of the coin, definitely necessary for a lot of critical functionality.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, so this was even before you were into Bitcoin, right? Like,
who knows when I got into Bitcoin?
There's no way to know.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, like, how did you even get into like the place where you were on the Bitcoin talk?
Yeah, that's
forum,
actually
like,
what I wanted to ask about.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Yeah,
like
I'm just curious.
You were like
further,
your personal history, whatever you want to reveal. Like how did you get into Bitcoin? How did you get into programming? That kind of thing.
I wasn't really a programmer. I'd like written some like shell scripts for my, like administering my home Linux server or something like that. Counterparty was really the first substantial piece of software that I ever wrote, and you can tell.
Satoshi wasn't really a dev either.
Satoshi had terrible engineering practices.
Weird, terrible engineering. It's really, but I made this argument. I was actually reading this post yesterday from BitMEX in 2022, which quoted me anonymously on Bitcoin Talk originally in 2014. Like Bitcoin, I think, is an excellent example of worse is better.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of the best examples of worse is better. Like there's nothing like more just dumber than double SHA-256. Like it's and that's okay. Like it's sort of it's a good way to do it. And Counterparty was built with that principle.
Yeah. For those who don't know, there's very much like a field of there. This is there's an essay, I think, called "Worse is Better," and it contrasts like two styles of development, where the main thing is that like it has to be possible to write the system, to create the system. It should be easy to create, and even at the expense of like correctness, even if the system is like not quite correct. And the two languages that people, I think in the original essay were contrasting, the two systems that people were contrasting was maybe like Lisp or Scheme as the like better is better language.
I remember being in the context of operating systems, Unix being worse is better, and then there was
like Multics or
something.
Yeah, like
it was the MIT approach was the other approach.
Exactly.
MIT is build it correct.
Yeah. And then there's the whatever other approach.
Yeah.
Which is like just do the thing, get it out the door, and then people will adopt it. They'll be like, hell yeah, this is ready, and it like it almost does the thing that I want, as opposed to the more complicated system, which is like, you're never going to get it done. Like it's never going to be perfect. You're never even going to release it. When you do, it's going to be missing like critical functionality. So yeah, it's definitely like worse is better. And ordinals is also like a worse is better.
100. Yeah. It's critical to its success, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Counterparty was very much like it wasn't big. I mean, it was the initial release was a few thousand lines of code.
Oh,
right?
really?
It was really like I built it quickly and it was simple. It was it treated Bitcoin as just this dumb log where you stuff data in, you pulled it out, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's you just had a bunch of message types, and you just process the message types by just like going to a Python module and running the thing, and it was pretty straightforward.
And does Counterparty use like the signatures that are in the Bitcoin transaction?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
As proof of sort of
for authentication.
Yeah. Do individuals who are transacting, do they have like a fixed Bitcoin address that they have to spend from to do
more or less. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
It doesn't really have. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty independent of the UTXO system, so you can't really mix and match. There's in a Counterparty transaction, there's more or less one input which is the first one source, which is the first input on the address in the first, and you have to spend from that UTXO for that address in order to do whatever to get past the authentication.
Yep.
And so it did this. But I guess so. The way to answer your original question, I built it Counterparty like quickly because there was this like need, and people were sort of out there like demanding decentralized exchange and smart contracts, and no one was building it, but people were starting to raise money to build it. And I had just been following Bitcoin talk. Like I was just, I bought my first I read about Bitcoin. Yeah. I remember it was probably 2009 on Slashdot.
Okay, interesting. Right? Yeah.
And it was probably one of the first articles that came up.
Slashdot, if you've never been to it, is like the site for nerd news. It's like more targeted than Reddit at like nerd news, open source news. And it used to be like a major force on the internet. And this is before my time, but a lot of Bitcoiners got into it because there was a Slashdot article. That was like, there was a wave of Bitcoiners around that time.
Before Hacker News, there was Dig. And before Dig, there was Slashdot. Yeah. I think Slashdot was,
So you were like a nerd on the internet.
Yeah, I was a nerd. I mean,
we've already established that he's written shell scripts to manage his home computers. So yeah, definite nerd.
Yeah, I definitely installed Linux at 13 and never looked back kind of thing.
Were you compelled by, like, what was it about Bitcoin that you were compelled by?
Well, so I originally dismissed it because someone made the argument in a upvoted Slashdot comment that it was never going to be successful because it was deflationary.
Made so many people poor.
Yeah, exactly.
Like holy shit, that one dude well, actually it's deflationary.
Exactly.
Keynesian economics.
Yes, exactly. That was the other. I mean, it was 2009. I was in college.
The deflationary thing is such a strange argument because you've got to make the argument like, well, it's not going to succeed because if people adopt it, then according to Keynesian economics, the economy is going to go bad. But it doesn't explain why. If you think about it, if you really like noodle on it, you're like, well, but I don't believe the Keynesian economic like deflationary stuff is bad. But even if I did, I would believe that people are going to adopt it. Right, because it's deflationary. So like whatever you're like,
they're seeking scarcity.
Yeah, so whatever the second half of your argument, that's like this is no way to run an economy.
Yeah, it was wrong. It was just 100% wrong.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, for also it's not deflationary yet. Right? Like, that's an important detail. The idea was that people would just hold forever because why wouldn't you hold when you would never spend it? Right?
I hate this fucking argument. It was so dumb. Bad. It's like okay, you have money that's going to be more valuable tomorrow. But you want a sandwich today. You want a fucking sandwich today. What are you going to do? You're going to go without a sandwich?
You're going to spend a few thousand Bitcoin on pizza and then you're going to be poor.
Exactly.
That's the risk. And so I dismissed it initially and then I came back to it maybe a couple years ago.
Just going back to that, because I just thought of another really good argument, which is that we observe people spend their Bitcoin. We don't even need to argue about this anymore. About
in 2009, no one was spending their Bitcoin.
True.
That was the thing.
But people still make this argument. And it's like, people, obviously, they spend their Bitcoin. We see people spend their Bitcoin all the time. So that argument just double dead. Okay, anyway.
Yeah, very much. I mean, gold has lots of value and no one ever uses it as a method of payment. Yeah. And I mean, I've been arguing for a long time that Bitcoin is a much better store of value and unit of account than it is a method of payment.
I mean, I think method of payment comes last, basically. Yeah, because
I think it's high value, low frequency transactions where you don't trust a middleman, right? Where you can't use Venmo or PayPal or a credit card or whatever the thing is. There are cases where you want to move $100 million across borders without anyone knowing who did it, then Bitcoin's good, right? Yep. It's better than stuffing gold in your shoe. But it's mostly used as digital gold, I think. The way that, and gold isn't used as a method of payment very often, but it can be. So this was, I mean, no one had any idea, right? This was early.
Yep.
Anyway, eventually sort of like took a second look at it and reconsidered, my priors, and bought a very small amount, and then like watched the space. I was just sort of on Slashdot every day, the way that young nerds are.
Yeah.
And
I mean, in my day, it was Reddit. It was after that, and like Reddit, the Bitcoin subreddit was like high signal, early news. It was eventually kind of got politicized, just not politicized in the sense of people who had an agenda and weren't just sharing.
It was the Austrian economics and libertarianism and all this. Yeah, these were very important in the early days for just adoption and communication and how all of these things. It's changed and faded definitely over the years.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, like I don't even know when I meet a Bitcoiner who I who I'm just meeting randomly, and they're like, "Oh, I'm a hardcore anti-state guy" or whatever. I'm like, "Oh, hell yeah, that's not every day." You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now it's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
Yes.
But for a while it was you are a like you have a poster of Mises on your wall kind of thing in order to if you're gonna own Bitcoin, right?
A pinup.
Yeah, exactly. I was always, sort of an interesting thing, like when it eventually made its way, when Bitcoin as a subject and cryptocurrency made its way to like the Hacker News culture, maybe even before then, there was a lot of skepticism about the technology because of the way that money and value was integrated with it, right? That people, these are professional software engineers who didn't like that it looked like different software, like it works differently from a regular old database, and that money and so many scams and number go up culture or the economic philosophy or whatever it was associated with these projects, and there was so much skepticism and hate.
Yeah,
that's how I perceived it.
Yeah, I mean the big difference between people who became Bitcoiners and people who didn't become Bitcoiners in among devs is whether you, for whatever reason, actually took the time to try to figure out how it worked.
Exactly. Yeah.
But a lot of people just had these negative responses, and I was quite surprised to find after I had gotten into Bitcoin, which was some years after I had been in university, when I went back to when I saw randomly my friends from school and talked to them about were they into Bitcoin, what did they think of Bitcoin, and they're like, oh, it's all scams. And I was like, in my mind, these were people who were most primed to know about, to be interested in Bitcoin, because they were like graduates from a CS degree. I assumed they would be on the vanguard, but they absolutely weren't and still aren't.
Yeah, very much. Bitcoin, I mean, it was outsiders. It was, that adopted it. It was a weird thing, even within, these communities. And I always found the technology very interesting. Like I like decentralized systems. Like I was always interested in, BitTorrent and Kademlia and these kinds of like, networking systems, CJDNS, like, just mesh networks and that sort of thing. And seeing it work in this way with a different kind of security model, with just blowing the doors off of a lot of CS around, how you build a functional, distributed, decentralized system was very interesting. And I think that's what drew me to, Bitcoin 2.0 and blockchain technology as a thing rather than just Bitcoin, even though I've always like been very much, in the Bitcoin camp as opposed to the altcoin camp, I would say.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the questions I had that you kind of touched on in a different way actually just now is like, you talked about Counterparty as being like viewing Bitcoin as like a dumb database and kind of just like a data availability layer that you can just like pull and put information into and pull information out of. And I guess I'm curious, at the time, did that feel controversial amongst Bitcoiners? Because now obviously I feel like that's kind of like the main debate. It just was interesting to hear you talk about it that way, because that's kind of like 2025, the debate today. But I don't know at the time, like, did it read the same way then, or did you feel like it was controversial in the same way then, or differently?
It was far more controversial, and it was the same exact arguments that were being had.
Interesting.
Yeah, more controversial then than today.
100%. Yeah. Back then, all Bitcoin core developers, with the exception of Peter Todd, were vociferously against it.
Yeah, that's true.
In what, like, for what reason?
I think the reason is that they're developers, and they're developers of Bitcoin Core. And if you're a developer of Bitcoin Core, then your job is harder if people are using it for other things.
For weird stuff.
But maybe one thing I perceive is that maybe it's also because blocks really weren't full back then. And so they viewed this usage as maybe the difference between like empty blocks and full blocks full of frivolous stuff, as opposed to these days when the blocks are like mostly full. And so in meta protocols aren't really the difference between empty blocks and full blocks, the difference between full blocks and full blocks that are like full with more stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a big piece of it. I mean, I don't know that they were worried that Counterparty was going to be so successful that it was going to fill up the blocks. A priori, full blocks are good, right?
Yeah,
that's why I think it's interesting. Like that's why I think it's interesting, just like the level of controversy in a way.
I mean, one of my opinions, which I think is probably contra a lot of core devs, is I actually think that the minimum fee rate should be reduced to 0, because I think that you actually want to stimulate demand, and so you actually want like experimentation to happen at like 0 fee rate. And then blocks would immediately be full of like a bunch of weird inscriptions and shit. Like
they spend a lot of time worrying about database size, catch up time. Like this is my perception. This is a guess. It's like if you're in the code worrying about making sure as many people can run as many nodes as possible, as easily as possible, then you just want the database to be small. You want it to be easy. You want it to be fast. You just want your life to be. It's just easier.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's interesting. Like this is like pre-block size wars too, right? I guess that's what's also fascinating is that like it's sort of like the same argument being made, but then there's this like PTSD-inducing war that happened between, and it still feels like and I guess like I mean I don't think that people that want full blocks are big blockers, but it's like just based on the results of the war, the big blockers didn't win, right? And so it's like to me it feels like we settled it, and then. But we didn't. I don't know. And
I was actually for small blocks at the time because I think that that actually had a meaningful effect on decentralization, right?
Yeah.
If larger blocks, it reduces.
That's what I mean, though. It's
basically like it's like we probably have much the same opinion. Like whatever the size of the blocks, they should be full. But I support small blocks to keep that. Like that's the real limit. That's the real limit. The real limit isn't all this weird social pressure and like jawboning and shit. It's like if you want smaller blocks, reduce the block size. But whatever the block size needs to be, it is.
Yeah, they should be full.
Yeah, we need fees.
That's what's so confusing to me to see the argument in the same way is that it just feels like I can understand why if that war hadn't happened yet, right, and you still hadn't had like the consensus as a community of like what do we feel about this, then I can understand how there would feel like this impending doom of like, well, what if we just let them keep putting whatever they want and it just gets bigger and bigger? But then if you figure that out, I don't understand. Like, it just feels like the lesson was never really learned.
It really was not learned, right? So there were a series of wars, right? This is a multi-stage thing. There was the op return war in 2014, and the history there is that originally I think it was Jeff Garzik, but the Bitcoin core developers said that they were going to have an 80-byte op return, and they had I think an open pull request or something like that.
Was op return always an opcode, or was it?
It was disabled before that.
It was disabled before that, and so what did the op return?
Standard Israel, so yeah.
And what? Sorry, the opcode existed, but it was non-standard.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so op return has been in Bitcoin from the very beginning.
Yes.
But it was non-standard.
Yes.
So that's really interesting to me because that means that Satoshi created it. But then at some point after that, it was made non-standard.
I don't remember the details there. I'm not sure when it was disabled. I'm pretty sure it was disabled in 2013, and then there was a plan to re-enable it with a particular size.
And so was the idea behind it, I doubt, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, I doubt that op return in particular was disabled. Was it just that any output type that wasn't one of the standard output types was declared non-standard?
I don't recall.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yep.
There are a lot of opcodes, and some of them are weird, and a lot, obviously, we talk about opcat these days, which was also there and disabled.
Yep.
I don't remember the exact circumstances under which it was disabled. I built Counterparty with the assumption that it was going to be enabled with 80 bytes. And all the message types were sort of designed, all the encoding was such that, you could fit the useful stuff like sending and issuing an asset and whatever in 80 bytes. And when people saw that that's what we were doing, it started a little flame war on Bitcoin talk. And the Bitcoin core developers reduced the size of the op return payload to 40 bytes. They said 40 bytes will be enough for everyone. You can stick a hash in there. That's good enough.
Yep.
They were rationing your op returns.
Yes, exactly. And we said, watch me. I will put the data in the blockchain, right?
Yeah.
We will find a way.
It's so myopic on Bitcoin core developers. I mean, that this led to a bunch of things that are arguably like more harmful than op return, like putting things in bare multi-sigs that can never be spent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. We did support some the creation of some unprunable outputs for storing data, but we did not use them by default. We wanted to be good blockchain citizens. You can attack Bitcoin.
Was there ever any thought that you should find one of the big miners and just start submitting directly to the miners and just have op returns with no size limit? So
this is the thing. So first of all, I don't think that we would have been able to produce enough fees to convince them. The big thing that shifted is, I think, a very important and, aspect of the maturation of the Bitcoin community. In 2013, 2014, the Bitcoin core devs had all the power. the miners ran whatever the Bitcoin Core devs said. They did not have a very strong independent political existence.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, maybe, due to ordinals, that shifted, where the miners started being able to say, actually, and SegWit, where the miners started to play a role in, soft forks and, enabling opcodes, replace by fee was an example where all the miners, I think, adopted replace by fee as a parameter, right? Where you could sort of, replace your transaction before it was in vanilla Bitcoin Core because, they made fees, right? They made money. That was not really possible in 2014. It was, they didn't have an independent political existence. And then eventually the economy grew enough that now, it's not the case that whatever the Bitcoin Core devs put out, the miners are going to use. So there was this debate, debate is not the right word. Like, I picked a fight with the Bitcoin Core devs and they didn't like it. And, we sort of won the battle and lost the war. We were able to continue to put data in the Bitcoin blockchain by using multi-sig outputs and that kind of thing. We weren't able to be censored, but there was a ton of FUD created around how blockchain bloat was the term, was going to ruin Bitcoin and ruin the ecosystem. And however, the cost of running a Bitcoin node was going to skyrocket and people weren't going to use it for payments and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's just so weird to me. Like, I don't like those kind of halfway, like, political solutions, like, or using standardness rules or whatever. Like, a way more principled thing would be to be like, okay, like, we think that database growth is like bad and it's going to take time to optimize it. So let's make a consensus change to lower the size of the blocks and have them increase over the next like 10 years, which would totally be a soft fork compatible consensus change to take the block size and it's small and we let it go up over time.
100%.
And like, why, but like this idea that you can do these like halfway solutions with like standardness rules, and like obviously it's eventually going to lead to bypassing the mempool and submitting directly to miners, like
100%. Yeah. And or just people finding other ways of stuffing the data in, right?
Yeah.
It's very simple. Like if you take Bitcoin as like first and foremost an economic system, then with incentives and with incentives, it's people are you can reason about it in that way, right? How do you build a healthy ecosystem, right? Where like what are people allowed to, what can people do, what are people incentivized to do? The core devs have historically not viewed it that way. They've treated it like any old piece of software, and they have a lot of pressure on them, right? Like they're running, one of the most important pieces of they're developing one of the most important pieces of software in the world with a ton of value, right? They put a 0 day in Bitcoin, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
And they took an extremely conservative approach, and they have historically taken extremely conservative approaches. There's more context here. Also, the Bitcoin core devs were in large number involved in the creation of Blockstream, which was the startup that raised, I forget how many tens of millions of dollars, maybe a lot of money in around this time, 2014, I think, to create really the first sidechains.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so they all had a strong incentive themselves to push sidechains as a way of improving and extending and
Bitcoin is the dumb money layer, and if you want to do anything, you do it on a sidechain.
And it's sort of an engineering solution, right? You have this extra data, stick it on a sidechain, right? And it's a way of scaling Bitcoin, and people liked that it was a way of scaling Bitcoin. Whereas sticking counterparty data on Bitcoin is not a way of scaling Bitcoin, or at least they didn't view it that way. And so they had this strong incentive to push this development that eventually became Liquid, and they've been around. Sidechains was always the favored solution, and it morphed into the predominant narrative for extending Bitcoin today in the form of rollups. Right, rollups, if you sort of see as an evolution of sidechains.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting historical point that Blockstream was created to do sidechains, and they wanted to do like some trustless, like two-way peg, back and forth, where you could peg Bitcoin into the sidechain, do whatever stuff with whatever rules existed on the sidechain, and then the owners of the Bitcoin on the sidechain could then peg back out to Bitcoin. I think it's really interesting that I like Blockstream. I like the Blockstream guys. I like Liquid. But Liquid is not what they envisioned being able to do. They sort of failed at making a sidechain.
Exactly, yeah.
And I don't really think it's their fault, because it turns out that like everybody else failed at making a sidechain. It just turned out to be a problem, a way harder problem than any of us ever thought. You know, that these days, you know, what are sidechains? Sidechains are just multi-sigs, or, you know,
they're multi-sig.
Yeah,
exactly.
and the only real sidechain project is like drive chain, which I personally don't think is going to work or is like a good idea, but like that's where we are, you know.
Worse is better. Is this relevant here?
So, yeah. I mean, Paul Sports will tell us all about worse is better when we interview him. But yeah, like drive chain is definitely the most worse is better like project I
I'm
can
not
possibly
even just
think of.
storing, you know, Counterparty whatever on the Bitcoin blockchain versus trying to have like a ZK rollup pegged to a sidechain.
Yeah.
Is that a worse is better?
Totally. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
We're
drive chain is the ultimate. It's like we'll let the miners adjudicate. The miners will adjudicate the sidechain.
Very much. Yeah. I mean, this all goes back to, I mean, to your question around storing data on Bitcoin, and you know, this debate that's currently being had. It's still being had. It's like a very important thing. You know, what is Bitcoin for? Is it for more than just financial transactions? Is it more than just payments? There still isn't a clear narrative around that.
Yeah.
And
well, there can't be a narrative because we don't know what it's for at what point in time. You know, we don't know. We all expect it to start to. Right now, it's sort of like an option on a volatility hedge, an option on a store of value. It's too volatile to be those things because you might have a time horizon of like 3 months or 6 months where Bitcoin is going to be down, right? So we expect it to become like more and more things, but we don't know when and if it will become those things. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I feel like I'm a very strong Bitcoin is a data archive maxi, but not because I'm like a meta protocol person. It's because I'm like a freaky esoteric person.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
like
totally,
I think Bitcoin is like the pyramids of Giza, and it's like the most robust like archaeological digital document that has ever existed.
Yeah.
And so like
thousands
of years in the future, like an archaeologist will like dig up a hard drive and like, I mean, just I think of it as like a thought experiment.
Each block is you're just unrolling a little bit more from the infinity papyrus scroll.
Yes, exactly. It's like
when you say something really good and spiritual, you can get Aaron's eyes to go big.
Yeah, just
yeah.
But really, it's like, you know, if you try to do the thought experiment of like, what if like our civilization just collapsed right now and we left everything in ruins, and you tried to reconstruct digital civilization, like Bitcoin, statistically speaking, is probably a likely thing that you could find because it's downloaded in its entirety all around the world, right? Yeah. And then it's downloaded, everything on Bitcoin is there, right? There's nothing else like
There's
that,
also
right?
something pretty fascinating about Bitcoin. Let's say society and technology collapsed, and like a future civilization was what found the Bitcoin blockchain. They also wouldn't be able to forge it because they wouldn't have the ASICs necessary to do the proof of work to construct the blocks.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's like the winners write history, and the winners are people who are mining Bitcoin blocks and stuffing arbitrary data into Bitcoin blocks. Like that's literally how I view it. Is like we're writing history. We're like inscribing our pepes and like, you know, like whatever. It's a cultural document, an economic document, a political document. And so for that reason, it's just like, to me, it's not even a question. Like, it's like, I don't know. And obviously I'm thinking about it very differently than like, oh, I want to build a meta protocol, and so I need to put my data onto Bitcoin for whatever protocol reasons. But to me, it just feels so obvious that that's what Bitcoin is. Like, Bitcoin is this decentralized data archive. That's not all it is. It's not the most important thing that it is, but it is that.
I totally agree. And also, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious from an economic perspective, right? People are going to do it, and you should construct the block size, the protocol, and the fee system to incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior.
Yes.
Right? And you can't draw a clear distinction between, you know, these Bitcoin transactions should exist and these Bitcoin transactions shouldn't. And that's sort of what the developers implicitly are trying to do, right? As if the Bitcoin developers were never involved in putting non-Bitcoin data, you know, on the Bitcoin block. It's ridiculous, right? Satoshi himself, right?
Yeah.
In the
January, so whatever, chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks.
It's Bitcoin is like, you know, as a store of value and a unit of account, it is the heart of the Bitcoin network and protocol, but the value is, you know, is abstract, right? And because you don't know who's sending money to whom, right? You don't know what they're using Bitcoin for. You know, you could be using it for buying drugs on Silk Road, or you could be using it for stuffing money under your mattress or whatever it is, right? And you can't say, well, this is good and this is bad. And I mean, if you're a developer, you're sort of implicitly have to make that judgment. Like you're developing a self-driving car, and you have to say, like, okay, do you hit the old lady, or do you hit the you know, or do you have a 10% chance of hitting the group of school children or whatever it is?
The self-driving car, that's easy. You split the car in half, so you hit both of them
Exactly.
at the same time.
Yeah, you end up with a lot of trolley problem sort of things when you're developing it. But I think it's good to think about it economically and historically and like societally and culturally. I think they tend not to do that. The developers, they tend to think of it as, you know, how do I just sort of keep you know, everything running.
This is something that I think I basically say every episode, which is just that I think it's a lot of technical people who have no idea how to solve political and social problems or even engage on that level. And so they think they're having technical debates, but they're not really. They're having these debates that are more about EQ than IQ in a way, and understanding people and understanding how people work. And I think it's a real I don't know, maybe it's just an inevitability that like technical people are going to tend towards a certain direction and you can't really like change that. That's just how they are. But I think I don't think that Bitcoin Core and kind of Bitcoin in general is prepared for the level of sophisticated like propaganda and politics that could be operating within Bitcoin in a really smart way, especially on the mining side, right? Right now, miners, like they've gotten better, but they're still kind of just like plugging in the toaster and like doing whatever. Like there are things like Slipstream where you can like, you know, submit like a non-standard transaction and they'll put it in. But for the most part, like mining is pretty, like they just kind of go with the flow and like they're like, okay,
neutral,
right.
Yeah.
And so like, but it doesn't have to be that way at all. And probably won't be that way even as soon as like a year, 5 years from now, something like that, you know? And I don't know, even just like you go downstairs to the conference and it's like all feds, right? Like it's just like I think we're in a political era of Bitcoin already. It's just the really hardcore technical Bitcoiners maybe haven't realized that or they're not fit to like deal with it. And I don't even mean that as like they shouldn't be whatever, but it's just, I just see this kind of like impending doom around like very politically unsophisticated people getting sidetracked by politically sophisticated people. And like I've brought it up in the context of just like you know, the ocean mining people kind of like derailing Bitcoin Core developers to just have like stupid arguments over and over and over again. And that being like a pretty simple but sophisticated political act, right? Like you just get an LLM to derail someone on GitHub for long enough and they're like not going to do good work.
Yeah. And
so like, I don't know, I just think like there's this social political level that we just have to be smarter or we have to be thinking on it in some way. And it's just, I'm disappointed time and time again.
Yeah.
Listen, it's, you know, it's not surprising that the people who are developing Bitcoin Core are not necessarily the most politically savvy humans on the planet.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It might just be the way it is.
On the other hand, you know, and there should also be checks and balances, right? You want the developers doing the developer thing, and you want the miners doing the mining thing, and but I fully agree. And what's worse is that sometimes, you know, the developers are making these trolley problem decisions, and they're making a political statement without realizing it or being capable of doing it correctly. And so a good example is with the current op return debate, right, where the Bitcoin Core developers as a group are generally pushing to remove these flags and allow for multiple op returns and larger op returns. And when people say, oh no, what about, you know, isn't the sky falling? This is going to ruin Bitcoin and so forth. They say, no, it doesn't matter. And if it doesn't matter, then why are they pushing for it so hard? Right? Like it's a political decision to remove those flags. It's not a technical decision. Like it'll be fine. Right? They're making a political decision and they're fighting a political fight without viewing it as such, and they're simultaneously framing it as technical and political, and that's the problem.
That's what I mean. Yeah, exactly. It's not even so much that they need to become masters of propaganda and like totally not do anything on a technical level and instead do some like avant-garde theater principles applied to like social politics. But it's like
I would like that.
They all need to become postmodernist, you know?
Yeah. But it's like they need to recognize that they're not in a technical arena when they're not in a technical arena. I think that's the problem, is that like, I mean, I make this argument about rational people all the time. People call themselves rationalists and they just are rationalizing.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not the same as being like, there's some situations where you need to approach things from a technical or rational perspective, and there's some things where you need to like view it from more of like a, I don't know, psychological or like human perspective. And I think technical people often don't realize when they're outside of that arena, and they try to apply the same thing, and it's like what is it, cargo culting? Is that the right way to say it? I don't know, you know, it's something that it's like they're imitating something but they're like not really achieving it. I mean,
I can crib the philosopher of history, Oswald Spengler. He said the less anthropomorphic a science thinks it is, the more anthropomorphic it is.
Yes.
Right. And this is,
you saw my eyes.
yeah,
widen.
exactly. Yeah. This is relevant, right? Like these technical decisions, these debates are very political, right? They're economic. They matter. And yeah, we have to recognize that.
I was having a debate with someone on Twitter Spaces the other day, because Bitcoin Conference has been putting me on some like Twitter space. They're like, oh, Erin will go on and talk, and we can promote the conference by just like giving her attention and letting her talk, whatever. And so I had this debate like a week ago with some guy who was I'll leave unnamed, but he was kind of Austrian economics, like, Bitcoin, digital gold guy. I think he had even written like a book on Bitcoin. And he was saying, we were kind of debating, like, I'm on like the ordinal side of things, right? So he's like, oh, you're in that camp. Like, I'm in a different camp. Like, we're enemies. And I'm like, you don't know that we're enemies. Like, whatever. But he was making the argument that we don't want Bitcoin to be like Ethereum, right? Like, and I'm like, yeah, of course we don't want Bitcoin to be like Ethereum. He's like, we don't want like Bitcoin to be like Ethereum. We don't want to care about all these like programmability aspects, like Austrian economy. It's digital gold. We're gold people, whatever. Like, this is what we want. And I think what we need to have is a system where the holders of Bitcoin have much more control over Bitcoin. And I said, I think you're describing Ethereum. I think you're describing proof of stake when you say that. It's interesting. Like, it was like so interesting talking to him, because it was just like,
were you like, yeah, got him?
Yeah, of course. I got like the laughing emoji reacts from people in the audience, whatever. I was like, got him, fucking flamed him. But it was just interesting. Like, it's like the way that people can like flip through arguments so quickly, and they don't even realize, I don't know, maybe it's just that Bitcoin is very difficult to comprehend on all the different levels. Like, you can have one really solid understanding, and maybe that's like the Austrian econ side in this guy's like case, right? But then you can have a very different understanding of like what consensus means, or like how Bitcoin is like governed, and so I don't know, it's like, if you think of yourself as a Bitcoin expert, which you may be in a very particular field of Bitcoin, you can then like think that you can inflate all those ideas into every other aspect of Bitcoin, and generally your ideology will stick when it doesn't.
One of the things that makes Bitcoin as special as it is that it brings together a bunch of disparate fields, like really directly, right? You're dealing with just the economics and the politics and the technical ways, the technical components, like in a way that isn't the case with other software. Or other computer networks, right? It has a fundamentally different structure, governance structure than anything else. And that interplay makes it hard to manage. And everyone has bags, or a lot of people have bags. And that, biases them, right? If I think that a large chunk of the people who are worried about, spamming the blockchain are worried that the price of, like, they want the Bitcoin in their bags to go up in value, and they think that won't happen if Bitcoin can't be used to buy a coffee. And so their goal is how do I support Bitcoin as payment for coffee? And if you're stuffing art on the blockchain, then you're the enemy, because, you're threatening Bitcoin, one of Bitcoin's core use cases.
Right.
Yeah.
Core use case, buying a latte.
I disagree that that's a core use, but people really do view that.
Right. No, I think it's interesting, because you kind of brought that up earlier when you said like whatever Bitcoin as currency in that level is like one of the lower, and I totally agree with you, but that was something that, there's a certain ideology and philosophy around Bitcoin, the like Bitcoin is for everyone kind of a mentality, where it's like, we're going to get people in third world countries using the Lightning Network, and they're going to do like 50-cent Bitcoin transactions, and that's going to like, they're going to sell 50 cents of goods every day, like in their like village in Africa. And like, that's, and to them, that's like what freedom looks like in a way, and I think I can understand how, like ideology, like, I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing there too, where it's like, if Bitcoin isn't a payment system, does it still achieve some of its like, I don't know, like providing financial freedom to the world type of goals?
And if it isn't solving debank, if it isn't solving,
pause.
Yeah.
There we go. Nope, you're not talking.
I'm waiting for you to talk.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
All right.
I think that probably a lot of people feel guilty if Bitcoin is not used for, helping the unbanked, right? Then all the mining power is maybe even a little bit more wasteful, right? A lot of people many people who are involved in Bitcoin broadly see it as a critical social good for various purposes. And if it can't serve those purposes, then it's not so positive of a development, right? Then it's, maybe a little bit more for the BlackRocks of the world, or the the wealthy libertarians or whoever the evil party of the moment is.
Yeah, I mean, if you read The Sovereign Individual, though, it says not everyone's going to be a sovereign individual. Like,
That's true.
They warned us. Lord whatever warned us in the 90s.
Yeah.
Come on, Maxis, get it together.
I feel like we should go back to going back to like history of Counterparty. At this point, Counterparty in our telling of it, Counterparty has launched, and we had the sort of pre-block side, the op return wars with the devs, and Counterparty launches, and like then what happens as far as Counterparty getting used and all that?
Yeah, it gets I would say like a moderate amount of adoption. We had no resources. I was 25 years old, and didn't know what I was doing, and we didn't have a team. We didn't have, and it was like hard to sort of develop an ecosystem around it. And suddenly we were also competing with Ethereum, which raised $20 million out of the gate in what was an illegal, securities offering. And, they sort of started that engine going, and we spent, I'd say, months or like, the majority of 2014 sort of struggling with like low resources, right? Me doing most of the stuff. We like eventually brought, one other person on part-time to just like help out with the code. And there was suddenly this like substantial user base all screaming at the top of their lungs, like, when number go up, and dealing with a lot of open questions around like, how do you like, what does this look like? And people weren't really ready for DeFi. Is the way I think about it. I think we were just like objectively too early. We called it peer-to-peer finance, and one of the main limiting factors for the adoption and sort of the like building the health of the Counterparty ecosystem was that there weren't any natively digital assets for people to trade, and for people to bet on. That eventually appeared in NFTs, and it actually appeared on Counterparty, like to a large extent.
Yeah, what was that like? Like, was that totally unexpected to you? You sort of didn't see that coming, and then Habemus NFTs? It was
exactly. Yeah, it was pretty unexpected, I would say. I mean, people were talking in 2014 about like tokenizing oil more than they were talking about art on a blockchain. Art on a blockchain.
Tokenizing oil. Seriously, I think there is a token of oil. I think it's called a barrel.
Yes, exactly. I didn't take that seriously then. But people didn't really. They were more interested in. This is, I think, like an important historical point that Evan made, actually, which is that people thought that crypto was going to become more like traditional finance pretty fast. They thought that it was going to like reinvent the financial system.
Yeah.
Turns out not so much. I mean, that happened, but what's actually happened even more definitively is that the traditional financial ecosystem became more like crypto, and that's weird. That said, things have become institutionalized. There's now, things are regulated. There's predictability. There are more assets on blockchains and stuff. But the biggest limiting factor was that eventually there were no NFTs. There were no tokens. There was no on-chain value. There was just protocols.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of the earliest NFTs, so there were some very early NFTs created in 2014. Before we were talking about Kevin McCoy.
Yeah.
So I met him.
And Kevin McCoy's early NFTs were not even on any other chain. They were just sort of on Bitcoin with rules that he proposed.
Yes, I don't remember the exact.
Or was it Namecoin?
I think Namecoin had one of the first tokens.
Yeah.
That was transferable, but I don't think that's where the art was. It might have been there.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been a colored coin. I don't recall. There were a couple of tokens that were issued.
Yeah.
Counterparty had a lot of the first, art tokens. Olga was one of the first. By J.P. Jansen.
Mm-hmm. What's Olga?
It's a low resolution JPEG of a drawing of him and his girlfriend. It's very cute. And that was a transferable token on Counterparty. It's still I don't know exactly how it works. Like what the thing was. I believe it was just a Counterparty asset. Counterparty had some of the first. It had the first collection, which I believe is Spells of Genesis. And then I think it had a lot of the early like pseudo collections, like Rare Pepes,
right.
Which came later 2015, really after I had left the project. Yeah.
And what was it? What was it like for NFTs, like the culture to kind of like change? Because I don't even know of a single non-NFT counterparty asset except for XCP itself.
Yeah, it's really mostly NFTs, I would say, or games or that, related things, right? I mean, of course, people can debate the fungibility of different kinds of tokens.
Yeah.
It was small, and I wasn't really aware of it even. It didn't feel like a dominant part of what was happening. It felt like, oh, that's a cool thing that people have done. People built a game on Counterparty. That's neat.
Yep.
But it didn't feel like the actual the main narrative. And then eventually it grew and grew and grew, and CryptoKitties and all these other things, and the Ethereum ecosystem sort of made people realize, oh, wait a minute, there's value here, and this is actually going to be, the way I understand it, the foundation of DeFi, which became, also just much more efficient and much more flexible and much more programmable, despite the, terrible hacks and losses.
And when did you leave and why? What led up to you being like, I'm out?
I left really at the end of 2014. And the reason is that it had been a 24/7 job for a year. And pretty thankless, right?
Absolutely.
Casey knows about that.
It's like so they want stuff. They want all this dumb stuff. You have to convince them of the dumb stuff that they want. They don't actually want it. They're like, you should do X, and it's like, well, actually, X would be an insane multi-month project. Like, yeah, the degens, like they want this shit, and they have no idea how much work it is.
Yeah, right. And then, I wish I were as good as you are at saying no. I definitely
are there anything that you said yes to that you regret?
Yes, 100%. The decentralized exchange itself, like no one, like people used it, but it's really much more of a historical footnote than anything else, right? It eventually picked up, but years later, right?
Yeah.
I built. I don't know if people were demanding this, but I built a trustless rock, paper, scissors game.
They were demanding.
People were demanding gaming on blockchains. They were like, gaming on blockchains, wouldn't this be awesome, right? And I was like, watch, I'll do it. Give me 6 weeks. And I built it, and no one ever used it. No one ever used betting. The whole Oracle and
interesting.
And prediction market. Everyone's like, prediction markets, blockchain, perfect use case.
Yeah.
Regulatory, just like ignoring the regulatory, framework around it. No one ever used that feature. Maybe because I didn't implement it well enough, or more likely because they didn't know what they want. If
you ask degens what they want, like they would ask, if you gave degens what they want, they would get a faster horse or whatever.
Exactly. It's always, and running an open source project is naturally one of the most thankless jobs in the world.
So terrible.
But then running an open source project where there's a coin, where everyone wants the number to go up, is challenging, right? We were dealing with early exchange support. We just were overworked, and we had made no money from it. Yeah. And there wasn't a possibility of making, I had burned some Bitcoin to, own some XCP myself, right? And I was 25 and, had never had a real job before. And so I just wanted to go off and do different things.
Yeah,
right?
totally,
And so I sort of naively, thought, oh, I'll just leave it to the community. Seriously, that was the thought process. I'll leave it to the community. It's in a good, stable state. It has all these features. Maybe they'll use them one day.
Yeah.
And that sort of happened.
You did leave it to the community.
I left it to the community. I didn't do a good job of it. I disappeared a little bit too aggressively. I didn't stay in touch. I didn't stay involved. There was no nonprofit. There was no foundation. There was no governance structure. There was a vague idea that we might eventually use XCP as a voting token for protocol changes. And I think I even implemented that, and we might have even had a vote. But on one thing, on the people who were going to run the non-existent foundation. And so in that power vacuum, it languished. That said, when I came back a year and a half ago, I was shocked to see that people were still using it, and it had this pretty active core community of people who'd been around for 10 years, 12 years, really using it. And all this value was on it. And it had that it still existed. So it's a small active community. And now, you walk around the Bitcoin conference and you meet a lot of people who came into crypto years later. Right. That said, when you talk to someone who's been around since 2014, 2015, they're like, oh yeah, Counterparty, I own some rare Pepes. I own some of that. I've done that. That was my first X, Y, or Z, and I still hold the seed phrase to that wallet and so forth. Is that wallet ever coming back? And that's a really nice thing to like see how it's one of the most decentralized projects in the ecosystem.
Totally,
because
yeah.
it was so early and because of the
Well,
burn.
and also like a period of benign neglect. Nothing decentralizes like benign neglect. Or hotorakashi in Japanese.
Yeah, it survived, right? It kept running, and that's remarkable.
But I mean, I honestly mean that, because like a period of neglect means that there are no backwards incompatible changes that everybody needs to scramble. There's no backwards compatible changes that everybody needs to adopt. Everybody gets used to the tech as it is. They build around the tech. There are no devs to like beg to do something. Like people just have to do their own thing.
Yeah, there were some people who were nominally maintaining it, and they fought a lot. And then they implement
with each other.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard. I've heard there's like civil wars in Counterparty.
Oh yeah, it's been pretty contentious again because of the power vacuum. The people who ended up taking control or nominally taking control did a very bad job of it. It was mostly neglect rather than malice or what have you. Like
I also heard that the number of active nodes went like precipitously low.
Yeah, when I came back a year and a half ago, it was practically impossible to run a node. It would take 3 weeks to just spin up from scratch, and you were not necessarily going to be in consensus. There had been the previous fall, October 2023, there had been a protocol change, an unintentional protocol change to introduce a critical dependency on an indexer called address indexers, or RS. It's a Rust implementation of something that became like it relates to like the mempool and electors code base, and that had become a critical consensus dependency without anyone realizing it.
Yeah.
And what's worse is that it was dependent upon a bash environment variable that you would have set, which would determine like the kind of communication between the counterparty node and that indexer. So like people didn't have that bash variable set because they forgot to put it in their config file. They were out of consensus. There were probably a couple dozen like minor consensus breaks, but the ecosystem had sort of like atrophied to the point where no one was running nodes.
Yeah.
And like there was one block explorer and one wallet, and it was sufficiently centralized that everyone just sort of used those two tools, and no one ran nodes, and it was sort of okay, you know? And people used it. And that's sort of what got people through a lot of the bull market, you know, from a couple years before. Like everyone was happy with that system. Like centralization is like pretty convenient sometimes. And
yeah, totally.
Absolutely, bro.
And people were frustrated that they couldn't run their own nodes, but they were like, you know, most people
and
don't
so was
care.
there like one or two main nodes that people were running and just using IPC?
One. I mean, a couple. Yeah. I should say, I mean, there was a Rare Pepe wallet. There were a couple of other, there were a few wallets, and a few nodes, but they weren't necessarily in consensus. There was zero test coverage.
Yeah.
We had a checkpointing system in place where you sort of like every once in a while set up a checkpoint and make sure that nodes would agree, historically. And that hadn't been updated in 7 years. It was just unmaintained and badly maintained. It just had broken in a lot of ways, and it was limping along. And I think that I came back to the project when it was, you know, really teetering on the edge.
Yeah.
Why did you come back? Like, what made you want to?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I missed building stuff, and I'd done other things in life. You know,
what kind of things had you done in the meantime? If you can,
sure.
Be vague if you want to.
Sure, under NDA.
Under 5 NDAs. Yeah.
So I spent a number of years. I mean, just working at a more traditional. I co-founded a tech company called Symbiont, which was sort of building permission blockchains. But like no cryptocurrency. It was just you know like we're gonna fix back office infrastructure in Wall Street.
Yep.
I left that in 2019. I wrote a book in the philosophy of nature, philosophy of science.
Wow.
I worked on a submarine for a while as an engineer.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of taken a couple year hiatus with the book, I guess.
Was it a military submarine or?
No, it was a research submersible.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I sort of had never worked in hardware or like.
Were you on the submarine?
Yeah. So it would go down for 8 to 10 hours at a time. And I did a number of dives with it.
That's so cool.
Oh my God.
It's a small submersible. The pressure vessel is like 2 meters wide. It's a steel sphere, 1 inch thick. And it went very deep by design. It was the submarine was from the 70s. It's called Pisces 6 is the submarine. And I went down to 300 meters.
I don't know. I assume I should be impressed by that. I don't know anything about.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about meters. Diving
feet, yeah.
or pressure, yeah.
So to give you a picture, at 300 meters, you're at roughly 30 times air pressure, like standard air, which is thousands
at
and thousands.
30 meters.
What kind of creatures do you
300
see
meters.
at that level?
Sorry,
Like,
300
what do the creatures
30x.
look like?
Once you get down that deep, you don't see a ton of things. I saw a deep sea shark.
Cool.
I saw some deep sea tuna, like a couple of big deep, like 6 foot long deep sea tuna.
So cool.
What was it about your like what was your philosophy of nature, sort of TLDR, and like what was it about that made you then want to go on a submarine?
They were actually sort of related in a way.
I figured.
The being underwater helped me think about certain things with regard to philosophy of nature. I wrote this short book, this like monograph on philosophy of nature, which is sort of a dead subject. Now it's philosophy of physics or philosophy of science, about science and the scientific method. And this was more sort of focused on what you can say, what you can know a priori about the natural world, independent of experiment and independent of theory. And it turns out that there are a number of things that we don't always think of. It's sort of, there's in the common knowledge that if you want to know something true about the world, then you have to test it. Otherwise, you could just be making it up.
Yep.
There's some cases where that's not necessarily true. So an example is the equivalence principle from Galileo, who said that all objects fall at the same rate independent of their mass. And he made a logical argument for why that's the case.
What was the logical argument?
The logical argument is, imagine that you have two heavy balls, two heavy objects. One is heavier and the other one is lighter. And they're tied and they're tied together with a string. So heavy ball, light ball, string. And then you let them go and fall. If the heavier ball falls faster, then the object will rotate and the heavy ball will be, falling, will be on the bottom, and then the light object will be on the top, and there'll be tension in the string.
Yeah.
And the light ball will be retarding the motion of the heavy ball. It'll be slowing it down. Right? And so that collectively the whole thing will fall slower than the heavy ball alone, because the heavy ball is being slowed down by the light ball. But together it's one object, which is heavier than the heavy ball, which means it should fall faster than the heavy ball.
I see.
Wow.
Therefore, they have to fall at the same speed.
Yep.
There are other examples of this. The law of the lever, sort of saying that which says that the torsion on a like a balance beam, right, on a lever is proportional to how far you are away from the fulcrum. This can be shown mathematically by, like, if you imagine the objects like divided or together or separate and so forth. And that goes back, I think that was Archimedes. I think it's Archimedes. There are other examples. Stevens came up with an argument for what happens with a chain that is wrapped around an inclined plane. Anyway, you can make philosophical arguments about this, and you can also analyze the concepts that underlie a lot of our theories of physics. How we understand distance or motion or space and time. And these have been made either explicitly or implicitly in history by Newton, by Einstein, by Boltzmann, in the construction of the second law of thermodynamics. And historically, there was a field of philosophy of nature, or natural philosophy, which was sort of adjacent to and connected with physics. And people would spend a lot of time thinking well, what is mass? And then there are people who would actually do experiments and figure out what the, laws, that governed, motion were. And physics became very successful, and people spent a lot of time just arguing about mass and energy and space and time and stuff. And eventually the natural philosophy as a subject died. And I mean, really, at the end of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, it sort of died as a subject. The early physicists behind quantum mechanics spent some significant time thinking about determinism and probability and closed systems and conservation of energy in philosophical terms. Einstein did as well, but it died. It's no longer an extant field. Now people just look at general relativity as an example, and they say, given that this is true, what does it say about the nature of space?
Right.
Starting from the theory.
Yeah.
And that's philosophy of physics. It's a different subject. And so, whatever, long story short, I spent a number of years studying philosophy of nature and natural philosophy and trying to figure out what you can say about the natural world a priori and figuring out how one can analyze the theories that we do have from a foundational level, like a conceptual level.
Yeah.
Conceptual level, especially using the methods of Ludwig Wittgenstein. He's I'd say the biggest influence. And Spengler, actually.
Yeah, that's super cool.
So how did that get you on the submarine then?
So the submarine, it didn't really get me on the sub.
They read the book and then they were like, "We need this guy on our submarine."
Were you like, "There's something down there. I got to go figure it out"? Like,
no, I spent.
That's what I'm getting at.
Exactly. I spent some when I was on the submarine. And I guess spending a lot of time underwater. Generally, I was doing a lot of diving. I spent a lot of time thinking about how objects behave underwater as opposed to in air. And we sort of, the way that we think about physics since Galileo and Newton is that the laws of physics are these like universal truths which apply everywhere, and then there are these confounding factors, or these like things that get in the way of them being the case. And the equivalence principle, saying that all objects fall at the same rate, is a universal truth. And if it doesn't happen, for instance, when you drop two objects from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it's because of air resistance, right? Like that gets in the way.
Yep. And
the implicit assumption there, or explicit, is that the ideal scenario is an empty vacuum. It's where there's no air, where there's no buoyancy, where there's no friction, right? Like the laws of physics are true qua laws in empty space. And they're not true underwater because water gets in the way. And that's like a particular conceit that was developed by Galileo, which is like extremely fruitful for developing, theories of physics. There are cases where it breaks down. So for instance, our conceptions of determinism and of mechanics. So look at the n-body problem as a problem in physics, right? The idea is you have multiple objects that all bodies that are sort of floating in space, and they all attract each other. And you can deal with one body, two body, three body, four body, n-body problem. And the problem is solvable only for n equals 2. If you have two bodies that attract each other, say gravitation through a gravitational force or an electric force, then you can predict fully how they'll behave indefinitely forward and backward in time. If you have n equals 3 or 4, you can say absolutely nothing. You just can't say how they will behave. You can like run a computational analysis, but there's no guarantee that computational analysis will be correct. You can just sort of like say, well, if we measure correctly enough, then like if we model it closely enough, then it might happen, right? But we sort of treat the n equals 2 case as the default, and we treat all the higher n cases as like, well, we just they're just confounding factors that we're not taking into account. And really, the n equals 2 case is the exception rather than the rule.
Right.
And the physics in an empty space are the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
I would argue.
Absolutely.
When you're underwater, like the law of inertia doesn't apply.
Right.
If you push an object and you stop pushing it, it stops moving. Right. And all objects do not fall at the same rate. In fact, some objects rise. Right. And what's interesting is that like the ancient Greeks in their conception of physics and the natural world took the underwater case, the hydrostatic case, as the default. They said those like we're all in a medium. We're in the medium of air, and sometimes the medium is denser. But they sort of in some deeper sense like didn't talk about vacuums. They sort of spent lots of time talking about like whether it was even possible to have a vacuum. Whereas at post Galileo, everyone was like, oh, there's a vacuum, and that's the default, and then we're all just sort of floating in the vacuum.
Yeah.
And so looking at these different ways that we sort of conceive of, for instance, distance as related to physics in a vacuum as opposed to underwater, or speed or motion or time or what have you.
Damn.
Yeah.
And then you were like, I got to go back to Counterparty.
Yeah, and then I would
Exactly. On the
You're like, I need to go back to open source development.
Exactly. But what about the thankless task of running an open source project?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? Because I go through these phases, and it's not just with Ord, it's also with other projects. I have 2 other projects that sort of have enough users to be like what am I doing with this? And that one is Just, which is a make like command runner, and the other one is called IMDL. That gets less usage, but it's a BitTorrent torrent file creator. And I go through these phases where like I'm enthusiastic about working on both, and I do a lot of work and I really engage, and then I just fucking can't. And right now I'm at like a I fucking can't point. Like my GitHub notifications, I've got like pages and pages of GitHub notifications to go through. A lot of them are for Just, some of them are for Ord, and like I'm like, I know I'll get back into it at some point, but I don't know how. So yeah, any tips?
The thing that I did is I said, fuck it, I'm out. And then I paid the consequences, right? Like I paid the price, which is like seeing, Counterparty not, like seeing it go through years of struggle, right? And that like, and not, and like be like in particularly historically important, having like being culturally important, having this like space, but seeing what happens when that power vacuum is left, and like having, and like, and then having to come back years later and fix all the problems.
Yeah.
That's a price to pay, right? Like I spent the past, a lot of the past year fixing problems that wouldn't have happened if I had disappeared.
How is your return received?
Very enthusiastically initially. But as soon as I think my position became more stable, then it becomes a little bit more of like when number go up.
Yeah.
And
what
back into the
what does number go up for Counterparty? Is it like the assets? Is it like the XCP
it's
token?
It's more the assets, but it is also the XCP token. I mean, that's like an important thing.
I'm sure there's some crazy like XCP whales out there who are just, it's like, I mean, XCP, it's sort of considered this feature, but it's not the point of it. It's considered like it's sort of treated as a gas token, which is how I think it should be treated as a gas token. Like it's not competitive with Bitcoin. It's a different thing. But also people are holding a lot of cards in the NFT market down right now. And they feel it. And there was like a time a few years ago when, there was more liquidity and people were, whatever, riding high on the hog. And that's not now. And now the hog is riding them.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I've been pushing pretty hard for decentralization within the ecosystem, away from this like single block explorer, single wallet, single, single node, or 3 nodes. And that's painful, right? Then suddenly people have to debug their own, problems, right? Like people have to, then they're demanding like, why doesn't the wallet have this feature in the protocol? Like because we're keeping it separate. We're developing the protocol, and if you want the wallet feature, then build the wallet feature. And that's frustrating as well. It's a little slower, and it's a little there's less accountability there. So like you get a lot of flack for that, right? You just are naturally going to be the person who is responsible for everyone's problems. And it's much easier to criticize than it is to help, right? That said, like I'm like, Counterparty is still my baby, I guess. And I like want to steward it for the long term. And so I sort of see it as a very long-term endeavor. And that helps me, right? Like sort of looking at things on a 10, 20 year time horizon keeps me motivated. And understanding, like that kind of commitment is a critical part of it, rather than, just sort of this project that I'm working on and like, they don't like
this week is stressful.
Yeah, this week is stressful.
This day is stressful.
And I try and focus on the long term thing. And that means sometimes like I slow down, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe you need to go under the ocean for a little while.
I mean, I am under the ocean right now. I'm an ocean of GitHub notifications. But I'm doing okay with it. Like I kind of look at them every day, and then I close the tab. That's better than not looking at them.
That's true. That's a step.
Yeah, it's a step. Maybe I won't look at them. I don't know.
I send them to my email so that I have to deal with them.
Oh yeah, damn.
Yeah.
I can't do that shit, man. I have to get to inbox 0 in Gmail. Oof. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen with me. I think I'm gonna get back to it. There's starting to be this like critical mass of things that I want to do. Like I want to do. Ord uses the Bitcoin Core wallet via the RPC, which was kind of a good idea at the time, but is a huge problem. I mean, like the Bitcoin Core RPC layer is terrible. Yeah, and like I'm actually, that's one of the things that I'm really frustrated with the Bitcoin Core developers, because not putting words in any individual core developer's mouth, because it isn't really a problem with some individual core developers. It's really just sort of the attitude and direction of the project and what they think is important or not. But, you know, they're always like, run Bitcoin Core, 2 clients are dangerous, like, got to stay in consensus, blah, blah, blah. But if you're an app developer, like, interfacing with Bitcoin Core is a miserable experience. Like, the RPCs are terrible.
RPC is terrible, right? And like the startup and the shutdown and the everything is, it's really painful.
I even have a path to make the RPC interface better, which is, if you look at the code inside of Bitcoin Core, it actually has structured definitions with the input types, the output types, and the method names of all of the RPC, JSON RPC interface. It's in the C++.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a PR on Bitcoin Core, not merged, not making any progress. Nobody seems to be interested in it. That exports all of that internal structured data as JSON. So then what you could do is you could, if you want to make a client library for Bitcoin Core, you could code generate the entire surface of the RPC library.
Yep.
And every time Bitcoin Core released a new version, changed some RPCs, whatever, you would just code gen it again, and that would be the new version. And then you would always be in step with Bitcoin Core. But it's like Bitcoin Core doesn't really care. They're not really application developers, so they don't really get or care about the needs of application developers. They're not exactly miners, so they don't get or care about the what miners want to do. And it's sort of like, I think Bitcoin Core struggles to exactly understand and define its core audience. Yeah. In the sense of, like, well, who is the core audience of Bitcoin Core? It can't be developers working on Bitcoin Core, and it can't just be like the abstract health of the network or health of consensus. Like, ultimately, people want to use Bitcoin Core to do things. The core audience of Bitcoin Core is not Bitcoin Core wallet users, because there's very, very few of them. Essentially, the core audience is like app developers, miners, and individual users who use wallets that communicate with Bitcoin Core. Like, if you're using Sparrow, that's communicating with Bitcoin Core. But none of those things really seem to be the focus. The focus is kind of on tinkering and on definitely making improvements to things, making improvements to a lot of things. But the purpose and the direction is kind of unclear. It's like, what does any particular Bitcoin Core developer feel like working on today? Which also, I don't blame. If I was going to work on Bitcoin Core, actually, no, if I was going to work on Bitcoin Core, I'm so pissed about the RPC interface being so shitty. Like,
that'd be the first thing. 100%.
That'd be the first thing, yeah. But like,
and the 0MQ.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge problem that Bitcoin Core has so many RPC layers. I actually think that, and now it has another one. It has a Cap'n Proto RPC layer,
like a protobuf.
Yeah, it's similar to protobuf, but it's called Cap'n Proto. Yeah, it's a different.
Okay.
It's different from protobufs, but kind of same idea. And I think that's all a terrible idea. Like, I actually think that Bitcoin Core should only have one I/O interface with the outside world, which is the P2P interface, and that there should be an authed P2P interface for the owner of a node to do things like with it. The reason being that all of the other things, 0MQ, JSON RPC, the REST API, the protobuf, those can all go away. But it will have to continue to have the P2P interface. So use that for everything. It gets encryption, it gets everything. Like, just talk to Bitcoin Core through the P2P interface. Have a pub key auth way of connecting to the interface, and then authing yourself, and then do everything through that. Everything else is like a sideshow. But anyways, it's like, but I understand, like, from the outside looking in, it looks like very frustrating. It's like, why isn't Bitcoin Core solving my problems? Why isn't Bitcoin Core solving the problems of other people? But as an open source dev, like, I get it. When I work on an open source project that's like, you know, when it's not I sometimes add things because the users want them, but a lot of the time I add them because I think they're cool and that's what I want to work on. And it's also largely like in many ways a volunteer project. But at the same time, it's actually not. Like, a lot of the Bitcoin Core devs are paid full-time employees.
Yeah, there's money behind there, right? Like, they're, you know.
But it feels like there's not really demands being put on them.
Correct.
Like you would get at a normal company. Like, hey, solve problem number uno. You know what I mean? Solve the biggest problem, regardless of whether it's the one that you personally want to work on or not. You know?
Yeah, I find it frustrating to work with Bitcoin Core as well. Yeah. I mean,
and to be clear, I love the Bitcoin Core developers individually. Some of my favorite people on earth, super smart, whatever. This is more like institutional complaints. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, right. There's the you know, the organization, right, of Bitcoin Core. Yeah, I mean, I also find it frustrating to work with. Definitely. I mean, I ran into a pretty nasty bug recently, which is outside the RPC thing, is outside of the you know, the question of who the user is, where if you have a mem pool, the DB cache size set to a non-trivial level, which is useful for like speeding up catch up. And they recommend, you can set it to 8 gigabytes or whatever it is if you want to have a faster catch up. Then Bitcoin Core won't shut down. Then you have to let Bitcoin shut down at its own time, like cleanly. If you don't, then it has to go into this like rebuilding that, this internal data structure thing, which can take an indefinite period of time. And if, for instance, because you're running Kubernetes or something like that, it shuts down again during that period while it's rebuilding that state, database host.
Damn, that's a bummer.
Right? Like that's a core correctness thing. That is your node is borked because you dared to run Bitcoin in Docker. Yeah. Right? And it's like,
how dare you?
Right? And it's solvable, right? Like, first of all, you can have guarantees on like shutdown time. Like you can have clean shutdown. You can have recoverable, indexing. There are various things you could do. It feels like it's a low priority, and it feels like, and if I were developing it, that would be, and there are many things that I couldn't do if I were developing Bitcoin Core that they do a great job at. That would be the kind of thing that I would make a priority, right? Or like address indexing. Like, why can't you look up the balances of an arbitrary address? Like, guys.
Yeah, and it's also like, Bitcoin Core developers a lot of time have like superficially good arguments for not doing these things. They go, oh, like address indexing, it's complicated. Not everybody needs it. Blah 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 blah. Do it outside of core. Look, we provide this RPC. But like the consequence of that is that everybody runs like fucking Electrum. Everybody
exactly.
runs
That's
some,
so much worse.
So much worse.
So much worse. It introduces this like serious dependency.
Yeah.
It puts more load on the system. Like it's just it's terrible. And like if your user base is something other than like if it's any kind of organization institution, much less a meta protocol who they don't exactly favor. Like then it's a really critical thing. Like I assume most nodes that are used for exchanges or miners or whatever are running Electrum. If you're running Bitcoin Core in the like Qt GUI, then you don't need it. But pretty much everyone else would want that, right? It's a useful thing.
The surface area of Core is really crazy.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. And like I think about surface area a lot because that's where you get backwards compatibility requirements and you supply backwards compatibility guarantees, like the surface area of your software, all of the different input output ways that people can deal with your software, the files that it leaves on disk, the disk permission, all of the
wallet. The wallet ports, is a huge thing.
The wallet, the 8 different, not 8, but like 4 or 5 different RPC mechanisms that all do slightly different overlapping things that not clear which one you should use, and they all suck. Like it's almost like it's, if I was like a real serious autist and not like a minor autist, I would be like, all right, I'm gonna take Bitcoin kernel and write a new client around it out of Rust that has really good software engineering, that's really clean, that like, okay, yeah, you can auth the P2P interface and like talk to it, do all these things, like have like very pluggable ways of doing these different like indices, like think very carefully about the design. Like Bitcoin Core is very much evolved at this point. And one other problem is I think Bitcoin Core has very little will to remove things. It just kind of supports things forever. Like, okay, now we have a new RPC interface. We have the Captain Proto interface. Is that better, or is that just like another thing to maintain like forever that like you could have made the existing RPC interface better,
Yeah, a project like this is going to attract a particular kind of person with a particular skill set, right? And they're not necessarily the people that are going to be thinking about how to make the interfaces better for application developers, for meta protocol developers, even for infrastructure providers. You have to be, the Bitcoin Core developers are like probably some of the best engineers in the world within this domain, right? Like it is really, really critical code, and it's subtle and messy, and it has to be, tested very carefully. It's a hard job. It's going to, attract a different kind of mild autist, right? And that's like a price that we all pay.
Yeah, my big takeaway from this is don't be surprised when someone tries to project 2025 Bitcoin Core. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not saying they'll succeed, not even saying it would necessarily be a bad thing.
Yeah.
But just don't be surprised when that happens.
Yeah, it's like,
someone with an agenda.
The problem is that it's all going to be just like with the opportune thing. It's all going to be too little, too late, right? It's 2025. Like there should be a independent code base for consensus critical stuff and the wallet and RPC. Like it's just there's enough funding in the Bitcoin space for a better core piece of software that has that engineering done with that, like with these proper interfaces. And like people are going to, I mean, they weren't able to do it with BTCD back in the day. That was written in Go.
That still exists.
It still
Lalu
exists?
has like fully, I mean, like Lalu is insane. He's re-implemented everything in BTCD.
Yeah.
He understands everything because he just re-implements it in Go.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a madman.
Yeah, I mean, these projects like don't have a lot of political significance, yet. But
Yeah.
at some point they will, and it's going to cause a problem, right? Because
Yeah.
I
mean, Bitcoin Core. I mean, I was a Bitcoin Core developer briefly in 2014 or 2015. I worked at Chaincode Labs for not that long, like 3 to 6 months, and I just could not see myself working on that code base forever. I could not see myself writing heinous C++ forever. I could not see myself every little change I wanted to do being like so bottlenecked on review. So I think that will become more and more a problem as time goes on. I mean, we don't think about it, but we've already suffered enormously by the fact that Bitcoin Core is terrible to work on, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm a Rust fanboy, but for good reasons, I think. And like, I honestly think that there will be a Rust rewrite of Bitcoin Core, or at the very least, a Rust external. Everything else is in Bitcoin Core except for the consensus engine,
sure,
which is in C++.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like it's in the Linux kernel. You know what I mean? Like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe that can be your project 2025 of Bitcoin Core.
That'd be so much work. Oh my God. I mean,
You
I'm
know?
barely like, I
But
see
who else?
I see like a pull request to fix a typo in Ord, and I'm like, oh, not today,
We should probably wrap it soon because we gotta fucking jet to our next thing.
let me look at the time. Yep. What's next?
Good question. I think that the Bitcoin space is very interesting right now. It's like the Bitcoin meta protocol space, especially, is very, very interesting right now. I think even if they can't be answered definitively, asking and addressing the questions of how do you store Bitcoin data on Bitcoin, like what is Bitcoin used for?
Mhm.
How, like, what's the relationship between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies on or related to in the Bitcoin ecosystem?
Mhm.
These are really important questions, and I think it's time to answer them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to be part of that, figuring that out.
Mhm.
Counterparty is a big piece of that.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the whole thing because Counterparty like is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I want to be a part of figuring out how to like make the Bitcoin ecosystem less fragmented, more synergistic, where the meta protocols or in particular like can be interoperable and interchangeable using Bitcoin as this interface, right? Using UTXOs and as like a shared interface. I think that that's a really good thing. I think it's like a healthy thing for the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the fighting over everything from opcat to op return is not healthy.
Yeah, totally.
I agree.
Yeah. Oh, onwards and upwards.
We love to see it, and we're supportive of your
We love to
vision.
see it.
Thank you. I feel the support.
I look forward to seeing what's next. I think it's great that Counterparty has active devs again. I think that's really cool. I think Counterparty is pretty awesome, even though sometimes people oh my God, people are like, you need to add Counterparty support. And I'm like, that would be so complicated.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, what does that even mean? Yeah. Like, okay.
We added ordinal support.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
well,
sort of. Not ordinal support. We added simultaneous inscription support, which let's be clear, which was easy.
Which I think is sick. I
trivial.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So just I'll do the plug. We just released version 11 of Counterparty Core yesterday, and in 3 weeks there'll be an activation of the protocol change, and you pass a flag or you use an appropriate wallet, and you will simultaneously be able to, when you issue an asset on Counterparty, you can put the data on chain, which, by the way, a new thing.
Okay, cool, sweet,
right?
Awesome.
Like whatever art data, and
Yep.
you can simultaneously create an inscription.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I hope to see when I go to ordinals.com every day just to like look at what the weather's like. So yeah, I hope to see some like Counterparty Pepe's like weird shit.
They're coming.
How is it identified? Are you using the meta?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet, awesome.
Yeah, there's
That's
there's an ordinals meta protocol flag of XCP, I think.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool.
Love it. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much
Thanks
for
for
coming.
joining
Thank you
on
so
the
much for
pod.
having me. Yeah.
My pleasure.
We'll
Yeah.
keep. We didn't even say we're in Vegas. I guess
We're
you
in
can tell
Vegas.
by
Yeah,
Casey's.
I'm gonna go on stage in a little bit and just talk shit with Eric Kaysen. About
It's gonna be great. You're coming to our dinner tonight.
Yeah, I'll be there.
We'll hang out
Awesome.
more.
Cool.
Say
Sounds
stuff
good.
we can't say on camera.
That's right.
Oh
Ooh,
my
very
God.
spicy
Yeah.
It's
stuff.
like nothing like
I'm making a list.
that.
Excellent.
But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for joining. We'll keep hanging out.
See you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.